huge effort, Jorge, and you put so much work into this, and it really shows. Now, having said that, there are three areas that you really need to work on. Okay, one is really being careful when you change the context of the harmony. Another one is watching out about making overweighting the bass, like making the bass too heavy. I'm noticing that in a lot of recent evaluations, that there are a lot of places where the bass has just really been underlined and carried forth in some of the heaviest instruments. And then the third concern is assigning the right instruments with the right colors to the right functions. All right? So we're going to focus on all three of those things, all right? So just to remind myself, that is watching out about changing the harmony, watching out about overweighting the bass, and watching out about assigning appropriate instruments to the right functions. Now, in case anybody is watching this and is sort of confused at how the mock-up ran there, as some people may or may not be aware, patrons, supporters on Patreon have the option of choosing whatever section of whatever piece we're working on, at least for this challenge. And Jorge has decided to have me evaluate sections A, B, and D rather than A, B, C or C, D, E or whatever. So they're a little out of sequence. So that's why I didn't play back C, even though C is pretty cool. So I'm just going to stick to those because there's plenty enough to talk about with A, B, and D. Excuse me. So I'll try not to make this too long because I think, even though there's a lot of music to cover, I think that some of the problems in here are pretty easy to fix. But some of the overall philosophy is something that can also be just talked about with fewer words. It doesn't have to be really exhaustive. I don't have to completely take the guts out of your piece to give you the right kind of guidance. Okay? All right, so let's start off here right at the beginning. It's interesting you got an orchestra with 3 saxophones, and sort of looking across how you're using them, they are more or less doubling other instruments. They don't necessarily have that many solo moments, and even when they do have a moment that is kind of more important and more focus is put on it, it's still doubling something else, like for instance the violins right in here. So yeah, and right in here, same thing. So like these functions are all being doubled by other instruments. So that you're not really highlighting your saxophone section with any like in any really severe way. So like until we get to right here in D, where we're seeing more prominence, right? So I felt that you could have, if you're going to have all those extra voices, you could have used them, I think, in ways that brought them out really as their own section. Yeah. And then here, like, there's just a little bit of alto saxophone right there. And then, yeah, and then kind of not a whole lot rather than this one note. So the alto could have easily played that note and actually probably played it better than the soprano saxophone. All right, well, I'm not going to evaluate section E, so let's jump back to the beginning. So let's just like evaluate each section on its own merits, and I'll add little comments as we go. So here we have an interpretation, transcription of the opening part with oboe, single oboe, in octaves with second violin and touches of first violin artificial harmonics. Now, there's absolutely no reason for there to be a break in the bar line here. The bar line should cover all 5 instruments, right? So watch out for that. If there's anything that you can do, I think this is MuseScore. So sometimes MuseScore has sort of unpredictable results. You know, you'll assign, I think you'll assign like one roll or another to the violins, and it can just easily, I think it's easy to accidentally break the line, and it's not so obvious how to put it back in, right? So if there was something that just happened and you didn't know how to fix it, it's fine. All right. Yeah. So I mean, I kind of miss. I feel that the use of the first violins is a little inconsistent. Do you know what I mean? It's like first it's tracking all 4 of the melodic tones, and then you're just kind of using it here and there, and then when you go kind of up to the high point of the phrase, they're like when I would feel that you would really want it, like it's missing, right? And I mean, I appreciate that you're not using it on every pitch, and that's fine, but like I don't think you need to do this kind of dynamic mixing here with the clarinets softer than the oboe and the violins. In fact, I think they could all be piano, and you could leave the... which horn is this? French horns 1 and 3, French horns 2 and 4. All right, so we're going to test whether or not that is even needed. But so I'm assuming that this is first horn, so you should mark it with the number 1, right? So 1 for first horn. Okay. And then, like, who is this? Who's this player here? Is this the first bassoon? Is this the second bassoon? Is it both bassoons? In other words, you would mark A2. And then what happens here when it goes to a single voice? Right? So you need to go through and really mark all of the players who are sharing a staff. All right, but to get back to the scoring, it's interesting that you have a nice big long slur over your oboes, or your oboe and your clarinets, but you have no slur over the second violins. I mean, I think that you should throw this away, and you should add slurs that are just easier to bow for the violins, and just have everybody do the same phrasing and the same articulation and the same kind of stuff happening. And I think that would make this way more unified. Right. So, for instance, like here you have slurs across repeated notes. So, what do you mean by that? Right? How do you slur a repeated note? Does it mean that you want them to play this very legato, but with separate tonguing? Does it mean that you want them to play it as portato, sort of like making the sort of like pushing with the stomach? What does it mean? It's cool how English horn comes in here, but I'm thinking if you're really trying to be so soft and everything with the accompaniment, you don't even need French horn there, right? I mean, the English horn doesn't need any help in this beautifully controlled kind of scoring. And if you're going to push the clarinets up to piano, shouldn't the other voices also? Like here, it's a little inconsistent about what is louder and when it's louder and why it's louder, right? So I think you just need to think more about like the phrasing and about the roles of the instruments a little bit more in here. But it's still, in terms of just like the overall effect of the scoring, it's still pretty works all right. All right, and then here you've got like holding on to this sounding E and holding on to this sounding E. But I just really felt that here you've got the oboe working at octaves and so on and so forth. But I just felt that this note needed to be doubled by somebody, and it could be doubled by flute, right? Like maybe going into this very icy section right in here, you could underline the iciness by right here having the first flute come in and just double this and just give a little bit extra weight to the top here as these very reedy instruments walk downwards. Now here, I mean, a little touch of tuba is cool, but timpani, like we're already slow. You're at quarter note equals 70. What timpani note is going to last for 6 beats at quarter note equals 70? I think that it would be better for you to mark like a maybe a half note and then say, piano sostenuto, right? So the timpani player will kind of let it vibrate a little longer, but don't assume that it's just going to go ahead and die away, because it's the timpani is more about punctuation than it is about sustain in its own right. And the way that you have this all stacked here, and especially with tuba doubling on the same note, the tuba is going to absorb some of the sustain of the timpani anyway. So there's no need to have this sort of idealistic sort of concept of the timpani being this almost like a key on the piano, where you basically press it and it lasts for 6 beats, right? Or you sort of think, well, I love the idea of timpani sustain kind of cutting through here and sort of inhabiting this rest. By the time everybody else stops playing, nobody's going to be able to hear what's left of the timpani anyway, right? So I would say just give it like a dotted, if you must have it be a dotted half note, but probably just like I would say just a single stroke on a quarter note is enough. All right, so now going on to this next section, I'm going to try not to spend too much time, but like just really addressing some of the basics that I think you need to hear. All right, so here we get into the context of the harmony, right? Like which you're changing around, and there were like a couple of things that I can't mention all of them, right? But like here, like what is the context of the harmony? What note does every single left-hand pattern start on? It starts on a D, right? So when you do not resolve to G, then you leave the music in this sense of expectation, right? It's like, when are we going to resolve? When are we going to get to G? And as we move forward, finally, it's like, oh, are we going to resolve? Are we going to end up on G? No, we end up on E minor, right? So it just moves. It changes sort of the low D, which is an inversion, right? It's like the bass note, right? Which sometimes serves as like a the root of the D chord, and sometimes it serves as sort of like the false bass of the lowest note of a 6/4 chord, right? And then it ends up going to an E minor, and then the E minor goes over to an A minor, right? So I think by throwing in these low notes that sort of resolve things, by resolving the harmony, you are basically just solving the problem, right? So there's this dramatic tension in this that just floats above, and you're saying, well, here's the solution, G, right? So you are like giving away the answer to the riddle, right? So we have no more question, right? So it works against what Barvinsky is trying to do here in terms of just having the harmony float along in a very impressionistic way. All right. So and then adding to that the fact that you have your bassoon sort of rising out of this low note in the contrabassoon, but with less connection, right? There isn't that. You're not really going da 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 da. You're just going da da ba, right? So it doesn't have that sense of leaping upwards. It's sort of like, oh, here's this low note, and then this is starting, right? So it isn't connecting like right here. This is a really wonderful example of how this should sound, right? So with this ba ba da dee dee dee, you know what I mean? So this has a more fluid connection. However, with so many pitches underlining these low notes, the bass is more about these soft touches than it is about what its real function is, which is these patterns, right? So I just feel it's too much. Like, I think you could have gotten away with, like, and I see what you're trying to do. You're saying pianissimo, pianissimo, pianissimo. Everybody be really, really soft here, please. But it's just too much weight, especially with the tuba. The tuba is so heavy, and especially on this low D. Trying to play it pianissimo, like that is something that great tuba players work on all the time, is like getting the exact amount of expression on the very, very lowest notes, right? That very low D there. So I just feel it's way too heavy with the tuba. So if you take out the tuba, then what are you left with? What if you had a pizzicato on the double basses, and then you had a contrabassoon note that just only lasted half a bar, right? Then you would have a release upwards, and then this wonderful giving. It's almost like a cornucopia, right? It's the basket that has the fruit falling out of it, right? So it's like that, right? That each of these bars just is like a flower opening, right? But I think that with these long notes, it's similar to another evaluation I did just recently. It's almost like there's a chain on the leg of, it's almost like the cornucopia is chained down, right? Or the rose has got a handcuff around it with this very, very low weight in the bass. All right, so all that aside, right? There's the question of whether or not it even needs to be in octaves at all, right? What if this were just bassoons A2 rather than playing in octaves, right? It's because the octaves themselves are also adding a ton of weight there, right? So they don't even necessarily need to be in octaves. Now you got this, the scoring right in here. We have basically a note for note transcription of the melody right here. And that's all good, right? And then we have that doubled in the winds. We've got the flute doubling the firsts, the oboe doubling the second violins. We've got the clarinets doubling the middle strings here, and also English horn joining in on that, and alto saxophone and tenor saxophone. So what's happening here is you're putting a huge amount of weight on this line played in the middle strings, and you have a very, very light weight on the upper melody. So, what if instead of oboe, like just get rid of the oboe, oboists, what if instead of oboe you had soprano saxophone, right, or alto saxophone playing this line, right, and then you had tenor saxophone playing harmony with one of the clarinets. So, and I think that would give you a beautiful color. Like I would have first clarinet on top, tenor saxophone below. So you would get this pattern of flute, soprano saxophone, clarinet. Flute, soprano saxophone, clarinet, tenor saxophone, right? And I don't even know if you need the English horn in there either. Lighten your orchestrations. You do not need to use every instrument at once. You have a great ear, and you have a real, sense of drama. So I think that the problem is you're overstating everything, right? It's sort of like it's kind of like enunciating every word very, very clearly, over clearly. Do you see what I mean? Just to add so much weight onto things, you have to push so much. Now, of course, like you could have very, very complex, very integrated textures like this with incredibly soft dynamics, right? Everybody going down to pianissimo. That would be a little bit more appropriate, but I would still want to double up the flutes, maybe have A2 flutes on top, A2 oboes, or oboe plus English horn below, and then then things would start to even out a little bit. But it's still, I think that it's a sense of proportion, right? All right, and then going on, it's kind of more of the same. Baritone sax, like here you're starting to add this sort of da-da-da. And I mean, it's a cool idea. That's the kind of that little punctuation, and then giving a little bit of A on the downbeat and so on. But I mean, I kind of wonder, why couldn't this have happened earlier? Why couldn't you have had da-da-da and then just stop halfway through the bar, right? Instead of having an entire bar. Or what if you just went da-da-da on Ds, cut the tuba, also have D in the timpani from time to time. Baritone sax, cut the contrabassoon, and I think that might be a lot cleaner and like allow the unfolding of the bassoons to be a lot stronger. I mean, for that matter, like here you're really delaying like adding the saxophones to this unfolding pattern. Yeah, that also could have been something that came in a little earlier. Now, the other thing that you have to think about is the quality of timbre that the saxophones are bringing into your orchestra, and it is regrettable. One of the things I think that is holding back now, now that we have all of these tools as composers, like playback, right, mock-ups and so on, references that we can use, we are getting very unrealistic concert saxophone sounds, right? Most saxophone sounds that I am hearing in mock-ups, even the best of them, are not concert saxophones for the most part. They are like popular music saxophones, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love concert music saxophone. I have scored for I love pop saxophones or jazz saxophones, or I have scored for them. I understand them, but they're not the same thing, right? In terms of like what the timbre the player is going for. It's because saxophone is so changeable, so flexible. There are so many things that you can do with, so many ways that you can alter your timbre, your approach, the way that you blend with other instruments. It almost goes beyond the ability of any sound set to capture, right? So, yeah, so that's, despite, on top of that, on top of everything else. So you're not really getting a clear idea of how to score this either, just from feedback from your mock-up. All right. But let's stay focused on this. So I pretty much have said what I'm going to say about this. I think it all pretty much works. And here you have the snare drum kind of pushing towards this. Then you have a tish on the cymbals. I would put an accent here, even though you only get up to mezzo piano and bass drum, bum. Okay. Yeah, so contrabassoon plus trombone, right? So yeah, so I think that like the baritone sax is the most graceful instrument here. Contrabassoon will sound very grumbly. Okay, no insult to contrabassoonists. Now you have the doubling with the double basses, but the double basses you don't have any slurring on. In fact, you don't have any slurring on any of these lower strings. Perhaps you left that out, but you have all this beautiful slurring on everybody else. So why are there no slurs on your strings? I would have divided them up into like half bar right in here, like so, down, up, right? So just like to divide that, right? Or you could even do like do it by beam group, right? So each beam group gets a different bow direction. That also would be a way of doing it. But yeah, tuba, like this is just going to have an enormous amount of weight. I don't care that you have it marked piano, but just this big, it's going to have this enormous earthy quality, right? It's almost a Wagnerian interjection into an impressionistic piece, right? All right, so and just like some of the same things, I just feel like there's way too much weight, and here you're bringing in the trombones to cover that weight as well. So I don't feel that this is the most natural use of your trombones and bass trombones. So it's not that they couldn't play this. It's just that it's gonna feel very clumsy in a way, which is a shame because trombones can be so smooth and elegant, right? Is there a way of reinterpreting this, with repeated notes or with notes or just completely rewriting the patterns so that they fit the range of the trombone better, or they fit the quality of approach of the trombone better, right? Trombones are not big sweeping instruments, like playing phrases like this, the same way that, say, bassoons or baritone sax or cellos might be, right? A trombone is not a cello, right? It has the ability to do things that cellos do, but this particular, kind of sweeping lyrical kind of a thing is like the trombone has a different kind of lyricism. It's a much more direct and it can be highly nuanced, but it isn't like this kind of big smear of peanut butter. That's not the same kind of thing. Now, having said that, I mean, I've heard trombones do amazing things in brass quartets and like take or brass quintets and take like the roles of cellos and things like that. But I think that, like, in terms of just like the kind of orchestral scoring that you're going for here, I think all you're really achieving here is just a massively overweight this function here, right? It's the kind of thing where, like, I wish that you had delayed going to octaves until here, right? So like just hold off on bassoon octaves, and then here, like, you could go to octaves the way that you have them scored in the middle strings here. Yeah. See, now here is a place where giving us the root makes more sense than earlier, right? That makes a lot more sense. Okay, and then here you're bringing everybody down really, really softly, and you are kind of moderating the strength of your brass all the way through, and that's very important, right? I like the fact that you're holding them back, making everything incredibly soft here, and then this comes through really, really beautifully. I would say, like, I mean, here's where baritone sax could be so beautiful. You just hold off on the baritone sax, and then add it here, doubling instead of the bass trombone, which you're throwing up. You're sending them all the way up to this very delicate staccato on E, right? And then you have like the dovetailing into the C trumpet part. And which trumpet is playing where? Is this first trumpet? And then you have two trumpets playing. How many trombones are playing this? You have to tell us. Who's this? Is this first bassoon? Is this two bassoons? Two? What's going on? All right. So, but I just feel like here is a wasted opportunity, right? I think that if you're going to end up with the alto saxophone doubling this part here, and where are the slurs on the strings, right? If this is going to be slurred, the strings need to be slurred. Maybe in shorter slurs, right? Maybe like it would be better to do like up bow, down bow, up bow, right? Just like a grouping the way the bow is working. So yeah, so if this is going to all integrate the way that this is, I think that these need to connect rather than having this doink on an E here. I think that your patterns need to overlap and intertwine and connect, and I think that the saxophone should just be part of that, right? Here you got them, you're ending up with alto saxophone. Why can't we just do the same thing with the saxophones and have the baritone come in here, doubling the cellos, and then when the second violins come in, which could also be violas, we have the tenor sax come in and double that part and trade off to the alto saxophone. I think this would be much more coherent than, bass trombone sort of forced out of its comfort zone and then slurring into like low third trumpet. I would assign this to my third or second trumpet player, and then it's a bit awkward. Everything is a bit awkward here. I think having trading off between your saxophone players, I think makes a whole lot more sense. And then, of course, keeping everybody incredibly soft. In that way, the harp has a chance to be heard. Now, okay, so you may have missed the memo on this, Jorge, but you do not need an up roll on your harps because you don't have any down rolls. If you don't have any downward pointing arrows, then you do not need any upward pointing arrows, right? The upward pointing arrow is telling the player, hey, we're going to be changing direction. We're going to go back and forth between directions. The direction of this roll is up. But since these rolls are all upwards, then it is an overstatement. I'll just use a normal roll mark, okay? Normal roll mark, no arrow needed, okay? All right, so, and then here we're going to like all strings. All right, so, I mean, I feel that that's also proportions, right? You have to think of proportions. If you're going to have this much doubling on your strings, and then you're going to have no doubling on the strings, what is that saying, right? Are you getting softer, or do you mean this to be more intimate? And in that case, the music certainly isn't marked that way. What's probably going to happen is that there will be very firm doubling here throughout this, and then when the listener gets to this point, like it'll just feel like a pale echo, right? Rather than you could possibly double this with instruments of a different character, right? Maybe like since these are going to be fatter instruments, like let's say that you do go to all saxophones, or even just sticking with brass, trading off to alto saxophone, it's a fatter sound. So then you could go with a leaner sound, clarinet, starting in clarinets, trading off to flutes or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Doubling the strings. And once again, you're missing a lot of slurs there. The slurs are like the punctuation. It's like it's the thing that gives the sentence meaning when you write it out on a piece of paper. And it's the same thing here, right? It feels like you haven't added a period at the end of the sentence. All right, and then and then I've already sort of talked about this a little bit. This is all right, and you really are trying to balance this, and I appreciate that. The piano diminuendo to pianissimo and everything else. Yeah, and I think that right in here you could have had some doubling slurs, of course. You need to add them. You could have had some doubling by flute above or oboe above, just to keep this balanced. Okay, so now we're going to skip C, as I mentioned before, and let's talk about D. So here we're starting to get into some real saxophone scoring, right? And yeah, I mean, it's too bad that they don't make saxophones in sharps, right? Because we just end up with these massively huge key signatures. But like the the principle, like the way that things are transposed is still the same, right? A written C equals an E flat, or sounding E flat, right? It's down a sixth. And a written E sharp, right, is going to sound down a ninth, D sharp, and so on. So like there's a lot of inharmonic spelling going on here. I don't know if there was such a need to, I mean, there's so many different changes of key signature, and I just don't think that's necessary, okay? There's really, I think you just leave out the changes of key signature. Like you just end up with this big jumble, and it just confuses the player if they're sight reading in a pinch and just running through this score once or twice, or didn't have a chance to study it at home to do any like personal practicing and stuff. You're just basically adding problems here. Just leave it in one sharp and let the players add their own sharps to it, or add the sharps as accidentals and let the players read those accidentals. There's a way better approach in my experience working with concert players. Okay, yeah, and you have these really subtle little tweaks here. Did you notice that like they were really, really hard to hear? This is a situation where I would actually give these notes, these little tings right here, to like a glockenspiel or celesta or something like that, and just let the harpist go, and that way you can just get rid of, what I would do is I would give this to glockenspiel or celesta, and then I would just hide the rest, right? And then, because that is just the clearest kind of scoring, and it's just way, way cleaner. And then you don't have to write gliss over every single line, and in fact you don't even need to use the wavy line for a glissando. Just use a straight line, say glissando on the first one, and then just continue to use straight lines. Okay, it's much, much cleaner. So give this to a glockenspiel, straight lines, only say gliss on the first line. And then, and then that works really, really well. I think it gets to be a bit much after 7 bars, right? After a while, the ear just gets used to it, and we lose the sense of what is interesting or extraordinary about it. What if you changed like what if it went back and forth for 4 bars and then just started going all the way across, like going a couple more octaves, ending in the middle of the bar and then down? And so, like, what if there's some way of fixing it? I know that's not exactly what you want, but like, what if there's some way of making it sound a little bit less repetitive? But I mean, you're using the same approach throughout everything in here, right? And there really isn't a huge amount of preparation for this big smashing moment here, except for just adding a little bit of texture here in the French horns, right? And then just right at the very end, you push in on the last beat here. Of course, like 12/8, you might think, well, the last beat would be an eighth note. No, like if the conductor is conducting this, they'll be conducting in 4, like 1 beat for every dotted quarter note, right? And so, yeah. So I mean, it's interesting, with the baritone sax and the octaves, yeah, and I mean, I actually really like this part. Like this part, I feel has like the fewest problems, right? And I don't have really a whole lot to like, the cellos and the bassoons working together, right? I mean, it's still very thick scoring. I think that it would be. What if like your next piece that you orchestrated was just a chamber orchestra, right? And you instead of these massive textures, you really just had to work with smaller textures, more individual things, right? Because even with all of these instruments that you have massed here, this big army of players, there can still be moments that are very discrete that don't have to be heavily textured like this, right? But I mean, it's still very, very cool. The way that this is all put together. But I mean, it's and I mean, with the unison. I mean, I would have liked to, okay. I mean, I guess like the unison upper saxophones, that's still fine, but I don't know. I mean, I think almost just like even one saxophone there, like the tenor saxophone, might have been more effective than unison with the alto. All right, and then this push into here. All right, so here we're getting to the juicy stuff, right? And so now we're getting into areas that are more bombastic. So this is really like the warm up to the next page, right? This scoring right in here. So like my feeling about this is like maybe you ran out of steam a little bit because there are some functions that like get left out. Like so these sort of arching interpretation, it didn't continue on, and I wonder why. And you have all these instruments. You have this massive tutti here, and there's no middle strings, or I wonder if you kind of ran out of time here in your scoring. Because like right here, this should really push forward. I wouldn't give fortissimo to these instruments here. Everybody should be forte, I think. I would say push forwards to forte in the winds and strings, and mezzo forte perhaps. Just stick with mezzo forte for your brass. I think that's perfectly fine. And then here, where's the sense of urgency? Right, because this is just setting up this massive section right in here. Ba 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 da 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 da. Okay, and I feel like you're kind of cutting the nose off every single time. Forte pianos every single time. Da 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 da. I mean, I think 1 or 2 is fine, or like dramatic moments, but like 4 in a row is, I think, a little too many. Is a few too many. I'd say just let it be wild. Crescendo up to a fortissimo and just let everything rip right in here. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, but I mean, let's not get too distracted here. You know, how is the scoring working? I feel actually like kind of letting go of your upper saxophones here, and just kind of focusing with a more standard orchestration is working better. The clarinets and the English horn are working together with the with your violas, and then like these octaves right in here, baritone sax and bassoons working together. And like notice the trick of like how this treble clef looks like bass clef, right? That is the little strange quirk of baritone sax note placement. All right, so I think that's all perfectly fine. I mean, I almost wonder. I mean, sometimes like with these baritone sax parts, they really just kind of feel like bass clarinet parts, you know, or like second bassoon parts. I'm just not so sure that a baritone sax is really even needed for most of this. And apologies to my concert saxophone friends. Yeah, and then here you have bass trombone pitching in, and that is just going to obliterate the sound of the baritone sax, especially if they're all playing mezzo forte, right? So, yeah, and then like there's this huge fortissimo bassoon. I'm assuming two bassoons, right? Maybe it's just one bassoon. I don't know. So I think this needs to balance out. So, okay, harp crescendo to fortissimo, winds and strings crescendo to forte, brass crescendo to mezzo forte. You could possibly hold back your saxophones to mezzo forte if you feel that they're going to be too honky, right? And that's fine. Right, and is this possibly giving the game away? Once again, having so much weight on these low notes, which are not really in the score, except for like when you think about pedaling the sustain on pedal. Is it too much weight considering that we have all these massive low notes coming up, right? So yeah, and then what happens here? Where did the trumpets and the trombones go? Right? Did you cut them so that the harp would be more audible? Well, it isn't going to work because, you know, anything with trombone doubling the harps, the trombone wins hands down, right? So the harp has absolutely no chance here. If you want a plucked sound in here, then have pizzicato lower strings, right? That will come through fine, and maybe like staccato bassoon, or maybe some of these notes could be staccato contrabassoon. So yeah, so I would say lighten the weight here, because you're pushing towards something that has these long, firm notes, which are inescapable, right? And I have yet to evaluate any sections, any D sections. I've looked at everybody's scores, but I've yet to kind of go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And I feel that these rock bottom low notes here are something that is just really part of the music. It's like, I mean, you can cut them and you can change things around and achieve different things, but yeah, but I mean, and then here, like you're rolling on a B, even though the low note is a C sharp, and here you're rolling on a G sharp, but the low note is a B, and so I'm just not so sure how these timpani rolls really, you know. I mean, I think you're trying to roll on pitches that are adjacent to the harmonic meaning, but yeah, I mean, I wonder if you could just like throw it in here, right? Like once again, like the timpani part could be taken over by tremolo cellos, right? I am worried about the lack of you know, like here's where the saxophones could really shine. You know, like see this roll, bop, 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 bop. There's no need to go ba 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 da 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 da. I mean, you could have ba 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 da 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 da. You know, you could just put a little rest in the middle of the bar for some punctuation in some of these bars. But you know, just have more. I think just here's where the saxophones could be doubling the horns, and it's a little strange. Like here, like you're saying, 1 and 3, 2 and 4. Yeah. Right, and then the way that you have this scored, 1 and 3. So like here you have 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 scoring. So like the pitch order that you've got your horns in here is intersecting. That is 1, 2, 3, 4 scoring, right? Because first horn, then third horn on the next pitch, and then second horn on the pitch lower than that, and then fourth, right? So we've got a jimble jamble of first 1, 3, 2, 4. So my big, strong suggestion to you, Jorge, is to learn how to score your horns in the normal position, because I mean that's what you're doing right here, right? This is first horn on top, this is second horn on the bottom, this is third horn on top, and this is second horn. So this is fourth horn doubling the second horn, right? So it's like you're doing the right positions here, right? And then here, like you're simplifying things, you think, right, by scoring things out like this. Like this is first and third on top, second. But why? What if they just were both? What if both of these pitches were part of this staff and this staff? And yes, sure, it would look the same, but that happens in horn scoring all the time. And there's really nothing about this that really kind of screams the need to have the first and the third on the same staff, except for just like saving the look of the same pitches and the same staves, right? It's like so. I think seriously, just avoid 1, 3, 2, 4 unless you have a massively high part that both the first and the third need to be playing, and like I'm just talking about grouping them on the same staff. So just avoid that kind of scoring unless you really, really have the need for them to scream high and play together and to just really be this conjoined thing, or like if you need the second and fourth to play something low for a long time together. Then I would say you have a justification, but not here. Just score things out the normal way. Learn how to score things the normal way before you change the whole context, before you shift the paradigm. Okay, so here you got like piccolo doubling this. So this is the weakest register for piccolo. If you want a nice solid sound here on this, kind of lower flute scoring, but still not too low, then please just give it to your second flute. Don't change to piccolo. There's like no need for piccolo here. Second flute would be better. Same pitch as the first flute. Just write A2 here, and that just completely cancels out any need for piccolo here. And then oboe, like here is a golden opportunity. I'm just gonna go up a little bit. Like, see, you've got one oboe, right? All right. So here's a golden opportunity for English horn or alto sax to double what the oboe is doing here, and just to really firm up that line, right? But here's the thing: is that like by interpreting the exact same notes, right? Just really limiting yourself to the available tones of the piano, you are kind of boxing yourself in where this music could just really soar, like if you had taken it up a further octave, right? If you had built a triple octave on this. So this was one of the things. It's like both in my 12 common scoring errors, and it was also one of the possible pitfalls, was just like only using the same tones, and I think I might have pointed out this area in particular in the pitfalls, right? There really would be a need for a greater scope, right? Rather than just, the flute I just feel is wasted here. What if you had A2 flutes an octave higher, and violins doubling them, going all the way up to that really monster high C sharp, right? And then Then you had the second violins playing an octave below that, playing the same line that the first violins are playing now, with the oboe and alto sax or soprano sax doubling that. And then an octave lower, you had your English horn and, say, tenor sax and and C trumpets, right? Joining together with the violas on a third octave down, right? Because like the violas are just completely wasted here. They're not really contributing anything to this, right? They're not really, right? And then the other saxophones could be going along with the French horns, right? And then the trombones could be doing this an octave lower. I really like this, what you're doing with the clarinets, but they're not, they're just definitely not doing a whole lot, right? So, you could have one trumpet playing along with this melody, and then you could have the other trumpets going chunk, 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 right? And then the trombones playing below that, chunk, 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 right? Then you could have your bass trombone adding to the solidity of these octaves. One of the problems with your bass scoring is like you'll have like just a single note on like in this case I think you'd like stacking octaves. Like here you're going to, and in the score, like some of these are I'm trying to think, like in the piano score it is an actual octave, like it's a bass octave, right? So where are the cellos to play the top of that octave? If you have tuba here, could the bass trombone be playing the octave along instead of the same note, right? You could have the A sharp an octave higher, and here you could have bassoons playing an octave higher than the contrabassoon. So that would be the way that I would approach this, right? So I would, and then I really love how you bring in the timpani here. That's wild. It's very, very fun, right? But I think that, like, here you cut out the French horn. So I'm just wondering if you kind of just gave up, right? If you just like, okay, that's as far as I can go. I want to hear what Thomas has to say. So those would be my observations on that. But I mean, I can't orchestrate it for you. I can only sort of say, like, you could make it bigger. You could add more things to it, right? But I mean, still, like, what a huge effort on your part. And I love the way that you just threw yourself into this, and you have just kind of really given it your best shot and done as much as you could. And I think that, like, you have some really great moments in this. What I would really recommend to you is, like, in future orchestration, just really reduce things, right? Get some instincts going of proportions, of instrument functions, of the balance between bass and soprano instruments, and also like harmonic functions, right? Just really make sure that, like, the context of the harmony, like when you change it, you are really changing it for a strong reason, and not adding the wrong note, like not interrupting the original feel, like listen to the original, how it worked, and then think about the flow of how your change, what does your change do to the music, like going from these D's to G's, right? Sort of answering the question, all right, so think about all those things, and I really hope that you will be with us again for the next 3 challenges. They all are very different. I think, like, the next one in particular would be really, really useful for your development as an orchestrator. I think it would just be an incredible opportunity for you, and I think that you would find in 2 years the piece that we're going to be doing by a famous composer not really known for writing piano pieces that could end up in orchestration challenges. I think that piece would also be very, very useful to you, and maybe a way of answering some of the questions that I put to you here, addressing some of the concerns. And then for our 10-year anniversary in 2025, you'll have a whole huge choice of different pieces to choose from, and that might inspire you to play to your strengths as they're developing, right? So So don't worry too much if like a lot of the plans that you had and the things that you worked on in this piece, that were giving you problems that maybe, you felt, oh, I could probably do this better. What is Thomas going to say? Don't get stuck with the rear view mirror. Look ahead. Think about the next thing that you're going to do. Keep orchestrating. Keep working on it, and keep building up your craft. Okay, because you've got some great ideas here. We just need to like make them work, right? Okay, so think about all those things. Thank you so much for the huge effort you put into this. And I just feel honored by that. I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad that you are participating in this year's challenge and contributing as a supporter. That means a huge amount. And you're making things possible for all these other composers and orchestrators out there on the internet. And speaking of those people out there on the internet watching this, if you have stuck with us throughout this very long evaluation, then, do your part, please. Give Jorge some feedback. I know that he could, there are like a few things that I just did not get a chance to talk about. There are some people out there who specialize in concert saxophone who would have more feedback for you, have more insights, and there, of course, I could not cover every issue, so there will be other things. But one last little thing: you don't need to score your artificial harmonics like this. All you need are the two bottom pitches. You don't need the top one, right? Okay, so that's all I've got to say. So thanks again. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you in the next evaluation.